magic in human life. Passing on from the lower animal life to the plane of human life, we find on all sides many manifestations of mind power along the lines of telementation and mentative induction. Now as never before is this mighty force being employed for worthy or unworthy purposes in everyday human life. On the one hand, we hear and see it being used for the curing of ills, many of which, by the way, having been brought on by improper methods of thinking, by the adverse suggestions of advertisements, describing diseases, urging patent medicines, etc., as well as by the ignorance of the masses of people regarding the effect of negative thoughts and depressing autosuggestions. We also see mind power employed through the channel of suggestion being exerted to bring about better and more positive mental states among those who have been manifesting negative mental conditions. We also witness the exploitation of mind power under various names by numerous cults, sects and organizations, through many schools, teachers and publications under many different names and backed by various authorities. We also see the same force being improperly used in hypnotic exhibitions and in other forms calculated to weaken the wills and positive mentality of other people. But it is all the same power, no matter how used. Like any other natural force, it may either be used for the service of mankind or for its hurt. I would caution the student of this work from being misled by the many names and terms used by teachers and writers describing some form of mind power, and which the said persons claim to be something new or something different. It is always the same old thing, as old as creation, and just as universal as is electricity or light. When you have become acquainted with the fundamental principles underlying this great natural force, you will be able to recognize it always beneath its many disguises, garbs, titles and formulas. The same old mind power, you will find it, whether in the form of personal magnetism or the subtle fascinating charm of one mind over another, that form of mental force that influences as if by an irresistible charm, that bewitches, allures, charms, enchants, attracts, or in what has been called fascination, in which one person is able to influence another by exercising a powerful influence upon his or her affection, emotions, passions, or thoughts, or in some of the other similar forms of the exercise of an unseen, inexplicable influence upon others, or in the phenomena known as psychologism, with which all are more or less familiar, or in the phenomena attendant upon the revival of the ancient occultism in the last 20 years, under various names and forms, the fundamental principles of which consists in forms of mental treatments of one kind or another, present or absent, or in the phenomena of what has been called suggestion, of which we hear so much in the scientific circles, or in the various forms of mind or faith cures, of which so much has been heard of late years, and upon which a number of religions and cults have been built, or in the repulsive forms of mental influence known as black magic, etc., etc., we have the same fundamental principle and manifestation of the same phase of the general phenomena of mind power. The same cause is under all its manifestations, good or bad, black or white. It is all the operation of the one great law or principle of nature. We see on all sides men who seem to exert a wonderful and mysterious mental influence upon others, upon those associated with them, or upon the public mind. Leaders spring into prominence apparently owing their power to some mysterious influence over the minds and wills of others. Some attain power and position, others attain wealth and social state by reason of some inner force. When we meet certain people, we become at once impressed by a something about them that makes its power and influence felt by us. They seem to radiate a peculiar force that bends our wills captive and causes us to fall in with their desires to a greater or lesser extent. We know that when some people enter a room, they bring with them an indefinable influence that becomes apparent to all. Certain houses and stores have atmospheres of their own, which are perceptible to those entering them. Some places are depressing to all who live or do business in them. Some salesmen impart a sense of confidence and trust at once, while others cause the reverse. Some people attract, others repel. Some people seem to have a way of influencing the minds of others with whom they come in contact, so that these others will rally around the self-constituted leader, and thus cults, religion, and isms are formed. We all know how far a strong magnetic leader may carry his followers. We have seen many instances of it during the past 20 years. People have followed some of these leaders like a flock of sheep, and they will always do so until the underlying principle is understood and the people protect themselves. And all of these things go to form part of the phenomena of mind power. Surely the subject is worth investigating. Now, as never before, the subject of the mystic forces of mind power is attracting the attention of the majority of thinking people. In ages past, the knowledge of the subject was possessed by but a few, who jealously guarded it from the minds of the masses, the latter obtaining but scraps of the hidden knowledge, and that adulterated with the grossest superstition and attributed to the particular form of primitive religion prevailing in the particular place of that particular time. And even now, notwithstanding the popular interest in the subject, but very few have arrived at a scientific understanding of the matter, and the majority take their knowledge of the new psychology in the capsule of dogma and theory advanced by some particular cult or sect. Mind power has been known to the race in one form or another from time before history was written. In the earliest records we find many traces of it among all peoples, and even today it is known and practiced in a more or less ignorant manner by all races, from the people of the highest civilization known to us down to the African bushman. Many have been turned away from a serious consideration of the subject by the fact that many of its forms have been accompanied by the grossest superstition and the most absurd, repulsive ceremonies. They have failed to see that underlying all the extravagant ideas and methods of application, there was to be found a fundamental law of nature as real and as constant as any other natural law of force. And inasmuch as this law is in constant operation and all are subject to its influence and effect, does it not become the duty of intelligent people to acquaint themselves with this mighty force or law in order that they may understand its workings, take advantage of its benefits, and protect themselves against its misuse? Believing that there is but one answer to this question, this book has been written in order to throw light on a subject commonly left in the dark, or at least in the twilight of human understanding. I am fully aware of the fact that many ingenious theories have been advanced by modern writers attempting to account for the phenomena of mind power, but all students of the subject are aware that these theories, cleverly as they have been designed, are more or less self-contradictory, and many a reader has thrown aside the subject in disgust after a vain attempt at reconciling the opposing views. And to make the matter worse, various cults and sects and isms have sprung into existence, promulgators and leaders of which have used the accepted phenomena of mind power as a foundation upon which to build airy structures of religion, philosophy, and metaphysics. Many of these cults have practically claimed a monopoly of the great natural force and have assumed the right to be the sole custodians of the secrets thereof, alleging that they have the only real article, all others are base imitators, notwithstanding that all of them show that they have arrived to at least a working knowledge of the force and are obtaining results, each obtaining about the same percentage of success, notwithstanding the fact that each denies the other the fact of possessing the information and the right to use it. Is it not apparent to any intelligent observer that they are all using the same great natural force, in spite of their conflicting theories, and that their results are obtained in spite of their theories, rather than because of them? In a former work, which has served as a basis for the present one, I grouped the phenomena of the manifestation of mind power under the general term of mental magic, the use of the term being justified by the following facts. The word magic was derived from the Persian word maj, meaning a priest. The Persian priests were wonder workers or magicians, the latter word being derived from the word magi, the name of the hereditary caste of priests of ancient Persia and Media. The Magian order or esoteric cult of the Zoroastrian priesthood represented the center of ancient occultism at that period of the world's history, and its influence was felt in all parts of the world and continues down to this time. So highly were its members respected and considered that the term wise men and magi were synonymous. The three wise men mentioned as appearing at the birth of Jesus Christ in Matthew 2 were known as the Magi, or wise men from the east. From the word magi comes the term magic, which Webster Dictionary has defined as follows: the hidden wisdom supposed to be possessed by the magi, relating to the occult powers of nature, mastery of secret forces in nature, having extraordinary properties, seemingly requiring more than human power, etc. So we may consider the word magic to mean mastery of the occult forces of nature, the term indicating the existence of such forces and the possibility of the mastery or control of them. And in ancient times, magic was always believed to be connected in some ways with the use of the mind, particularly in its aspects of will, desire, and imagination. Effects were believed to result because some magician either willed it, desired it to be, or else imagined it would occur. In each case, the result happening as a materialization of the mental conception or wish. Wishing was always believed to be a magical operation, and if we examined a wish, we see it is composed of the use of the imagination coupled with desire and backed up with will. And so I felt that I was justified in using the word mental magic, and considering the various phenomena resulting from the manifestation of mind power. But by the use of the term mental magic, I meant more than the mere mental control of the occult forces of nature. I meant that these occult forces of nature are themselves mental in character and nature, and that their control or mastery means simply the conscious use, control, mastery, and application of certain mental forces called occult that are possessed by the race and are used by all, either consciously or subconsciously. The mastery or control of these forces means that one may learn to knowingly apply that which all have been using blindly and unknowingly. And as knowledge and intelligent use always means power, the knowledge of the principles of these forces and the consequent intelligent application of them brings power to those acquiring it. While it is true that which is known as magic has always been mixed up with a mass of credulity, superstition, and meaningless forms and ceremonies, the close students will see that this extrasenses and appendages necessarily arose from the superstitions of the mass of the people, and to the various forms of primitive religions that the race has fostered during the procession of the centuries and ages. The magicians were nearly always priests in the old days, that being the only career open to them, and one that enabled them to erect the barrier of primitive religious rites between their wisdom and the ignorance of the race. The careful student will be able to trace the possession of something real and true, always manifesting among the various forms and ceremonies of the various ancient cults. There was always to be found an esoteric or inner cult within the mass of the exoteric or ignorant priesthood and followers of the temples. There was always the light of truth burning in the Holy of Holies of the temple for those who were sufficiently advanced to worship at its shrine. And among the dim records of the ancient mysteries that have come down to us from ancient India, Egypt, Persia, Chaldea, Babylon, Greece and Rome, and the other old centers of civilization and cultures, we may always find that underlying principles of the existence of some mighty force connected with the human mind, or more particularly the will, that was at the bottom of the mysteries and the magic and miracle. And among the dim records of the ancient mysteries that have come down to us from ancient India, Egypt, Persia, Chaldea, Babylon, Greece and Rome, and the other old centers of civilization and culture, we may always find the underlying principle of the existence of some mighty force connected with the human mind, or more particularly the will, that was at the bottom of the mysteries and magic and miracles. Back of all the ceremonies, rites, and incantations was the esoteric idea that the will was the real force employed under the mask of incantation and rites assumed to impress the imaginations and minds of the populace. Back of the amulet and charm was the working of the will of the person wearing them, which was called into effect by the faith or imagination, a real power and not a fancy as many believe of the man ignorant of the real force. As the writer on this subject in the Encyclopedia Britannica has truly said, although he was ignorant of the truth, there being an evident relation between an object and the thought of it, it becomes one of the chief practices of the Sakura to try to make things happen by thinking about them. And the same writer in another place speaks of the element in magic, not depending upon spirits, depends upon imagined powers and correspondences in nature, of which the adepts avail themselves in order to discover hidden knowledge and to act upon the world around them by means beyond the ordinary capabilities of man, thus by mere effort of will, etc. And the students who will look under the surface and read between the lines will be able to see the evidence of mental magic underlying all the forms of magic, mystery, and wonder-working miracles of all times and ages and people, of all kinds, character or name. Behind all the masks, he will see the features of this use of the mind power of man, always the same in spite of the fantastic and grotesque masks and trappings. I could fill pages with recitals of the many disguises under which mind power masquerades, but I must hurry on the telling how, and I can do no more than to hastily call your attention to the many evidences of the use of this power in all parts of the world and in all times. The ancient mysteries of Egypt, Greece, etc. were systems of forms and ceremonies wherein were hidden the use of mind power. The sick were brought to the temples and healed. The minds of the populace were filled with the thoughts of victory impressed upon them by the will and subtle suggestions of the priests. What we know in these days as mental suggestions, including that which we now call affirmations or autosuggestions, were understood and skillfully used by the priests or magicians in order to control the people. And it must not be for a moment supposed that these forces were used for evil purposes. On the contrary, the priests were the real governing classes, the powers behind the throne, and they felt the responsibility of power and endeavored by their knowledge of the occult forces of the mind to lead the people in the right path. Of course, selfish men there have always been, and we hear of cases away back in the early days of history where this power was prostituted for evil and selfish purposes, just as power is always capable of wrong application. In all ages we learn of the healing of the sick by mental power, for mental healing presents an unbroken line from the earliest days down to the present, concealed often under fancy trappings, but the same in principle always. And what we called mental suggestion has always been in force in the hands of the leaders of the race to influence, for good or evil, those under them. The great leaders of men have always been adept in the use of mind power, although many of them have never suspected the source of their power. To many it may seem almost sacrilegious to state that the highest users of mind power, such as leading the race up to the higher ideas, aims and accomplishments to success, happiness and health, are merely higher forms of the same force that is used by the ignorant and the repulsive savage in his rites and dark practice. But it is true, mind power is like any other great natural force. It is above good or evil. It is neither good nor evil, but it may be used for either. This is true of electricity, steam, explosive, and every other natural force, and we might as well look at this fact squarely in the face and govern ourselves accordingly. The same force that is used by the modern healer when he or she treats a patient for health, success, or some other desirable quality is the same used by the black voodoo, the Congo Sakura, the Salem witch, the Hawaiian kahuna, who prays people into sickness and death. The medicine man of the American Indian with his charms and incantations, the wizards and enchanters of the Middle Ages, the practitioner of adverse treatments or malicious mental magnetism of the modern cults. The same force pervades all, just as the same life force flows through the saint and the sinner, the angel and demon, the dove and the serpent, the lamb and the tiger, nature's one force through all. And just as mind power is brought into operation through the prayers of the faithful of all religions, before their shrines, images, and holy objects, so may the force be brought into operation through the fetishes, conjurations, enchantments, charms, spells, and devil worship of the ignorant and depraved minds. The secret is this: the power does not come from the supposed source, but from within the mind of the man employing it. And still more startling to the uninitiated is this statement, which is equally true: the power of the mind of the person affected is the real cause of the effect rather than the power of the mind of the supposed causer, the latter merely calling into operation the power of the mind of the person affected. Passing from the past to the present age, we see in greater use than ever this wonderful mind power. No longer the property of the few, the information has filtered out among the masses through various sources, and we see the force in use on all sides. Often the persons using it have not the true knowledge of its real nature, and such persons often involve themselves in a terrible whirlpool of effects by reason of a selfish and base employment of this power. Many are playing with this force like children playing with dynamite. It is one of the purposes of this book to call the attention of such people to the nature of the force they are employing, and the possible, nay, probable results of a misuse of it. Not that they are punished for such misuse, but rather by reasons of it. Black magicians are invariably caught in the meshes of their own nets, are entangled in the psychic machinery of their own manufacture, and are blown up by their own psychic high explosives. In concluding this little consideration of the subject, I would call the attention of the students to the fact that now, for the first time in the history of the world, mind power is being employed for furthering commercial aims and ends. Mental treatments for wealth and success are commonly known and advertised. Instructions in the use of suggestion from commercial purposes are furnished both personally and in correspondence courses. The laws and the principles are explained, partially at least, in books written for the instructions of those selling or advertising goods and otherwise soliciting the patronage of the public. It is true that the few strong men in business life have always made use of this force, consciously or unconsciously, but never before has it been taught generally as part of a business education. It has been reserved for America to recognize the force and to boldly apply it in this way, that is, to the making of dollars. And other countries are fast falling in line, and in view of this fact, is it not time that those who know of the real nature, principles and laws of this force should give to the world their knowledge, that the race may know with whom they are dealing and may be enabled to extract the good from it by proper use, and seeing the evil possibilities of improper use, may avoid such prostitution of one of nature's greatest forces. Many students of the occult have sought to keep from the general public a knowledge of the fundamental principles of the great law of nature underlying the phenomena of mind power. They have claimed that it was dangerous for people generally to know that such a force existed and could be used. They have held that such knowledge should be carefully guarded by the few, and that its very existence should be denied to the many. This may have been good reasoning in the early days of the world, when the masses were grossly ignorant, and when the only knowledge was locked up in the minds of caste of priests and other leaders of the race. But the argument no longer applies, for the general intelligence of the race has refused to allow any locked doors in the temple of knowledge, and has insisted that all doors be thrown open to them. The result has been that a considerable body of occult knowledge has been opened to the gaze of the public, and they are clamoring for more. Much of the knowledge possessed by the public regarding mind power is but quasi-knowledge, half-truths, and the time has come when the whole truth should be taught. The time has arrived when the public should be made acquainted with the great force underlying the phenomena of mind power. People should be instructed regarding this force, its laws in operation, its intelligent and proper use, with directions designed to protect people against its improper use against them on the part of others. This latter, a most important matter in these days of occult and psychic investigation on the part of the public, and the attempt base and selfish uses to which some are putting the occult mental forces of nature. It is too late to deny or ignore the existence of the mighty mental force in nature that underlies the various forms of phenomena that go to form the outward phase of mind power, good and bad. Too much has been witnessed by the public concerning these matters for them to be hushed by the old cry, "There's nothing in it but imagination." On the other hand, they have witnessed the various treatments of the healer tending toward the cure of disease, the attainment of success, etc. And on the other they have heard whispers of adverse treatments, etc. and have heard of or read the various courses of instructions in hypnotism, and have seen evidence of the good and bad effects of what has been called suggestion in all of its forms. And they are beginning to realize that all of these things, differing as they may seem, to have a common root in some one natural force. And they are demanding, like the man from Missouri, to be shown, and they have the right to demand this. The race has always recognized the existence of the mighty force of nature, which man has employed, consciously or unconsciously, in the direction of influencing his fellow man, other forms of life, and even the so-called lifeless things around him. In the early days, this use of the force was called magic, black and white, mystical art, divine power, miracle, fascination, charming, enchantment, wonder-working, necromancy, etc. And in its more base and evil uses, black art, witchcraft, sorcery, voodooism, etc. For it must be remembered that this great force of nature is capable of base as well as of noble use. Like any other great natural force, like electricity, the power of explosives, steam, the X-ray, radium, etc., this great force is capable of the highest and most beneficial uses by man when properly applied, and is also capable of being applied to the most harmful purposes. Different as are the results arising from the varying applications, the force is the same in each case. The forces of nature are not possessed of a sense of good and evil. Their function and purpose is to act in obedience to the laws of their nature, without regard to the question of good and evil, to those by whom or against whom they are employed. This may seem like a terrible thing, but a moment's thought will satisfy you that it is true of all natural forces, and the question of good and evil and its reward or punishment belongs to another plane of life. But, it may be asked, why do I wish to inform the public about a force unknown to many, which is capable of evil as well as of good use and results? The answer is simple. Ignorance is no protection against anything, for the knowledge is always possessed of the few who may use it on the ignorant, many without suspicion. The greater publicity is given to a thing, and the better it is understood, the better may its good effect be obtained, and the less the danger of its improper use. Forewarned is forearmed. If a thing is good, the greater publicity given it, the greater the good. If it is evil, the brighter the searchlight turned upon it, the less danger is there attendant upon it. The danger of all evils lies in the darkness of concealment, not in the daylight of publicity. Turn on the light has always been the watchword of progress and civilization, and more particularly is this so at this, the first decade of the 20th century, when the interest of occultism and kindred subjects has made a number of people acquainted with mind power, and has acquainted them with its uses under various names and theories. And in many cases it is being practiced upon people who are unfamiliar with the subject, and therefore it is time that someone should turn on the light, that it may be seen by all men and known for what it is, capable of the highest and lowest uses, but a great force of nature. And with this exposition of it, goes the remedy and protection against improper use, as well as the knowledge of its wonderful proper uses. If it be a bane, here is the antidote, but it is not necessarily a bane, any more than steam, electricity, and explosives are a bane to mankind. What would be thought of people who would suppress knowledge of all natural laws because of the possibility of improper use? Ignorance is no protection. Truth and fact must be followed to the end, and it will be discovered that in nature every force that may be possible of hurtful use may be guarded against by natural means. So much for the unpleasant side, but there is a very pleasant side to this subject of mind power. This force has come to man just when he most needs it. He has used the so-called mechanical forces to clear away the obstacles that nature put into his way in order to develop him into a man. And now he turns to higher forms of energy and work. He is crying for new worlds to conquer, and these new worlds will be conquered by the mind rather than by the muscle. Great things are before the race, and one of the greatest forces in nature, in the work of the building up of a Superman, will be this force called mind power. By it man will be enabled to fight off the forces of ignorance and materialism, and to draw to himself knowledge from the universal mind. That will enable him to accomplish the heretofore impossible. In this book I shall treat mind power as I would any other great force or energy of nature. That is, in a scientific manner, stating the principles plainly and without concealment, and also giving in full what I and other experimenters along the lines of this subject have learnt of the methods beneficial and the reverse concerning the applications of these principles. In the case of the beneficial application, full directions will be given that the students may avail himself of the force to the fullest extent. In the case where the subject of the harmful use of the force is alluded to, the student will be instructed how the same may be prevented, obviated, and neutralized, so that full protection is assured. This is what I should do in lessons upon electricity, steam, or explosives, and that is the course I propose to follow in this work. It is possible that this course may bring upon me the adverse criticism of those who believe that the public is not ready for such knowledge, and that such things should be reserved for the few. To such people and all others I would say that I have no sympathy with such an attitude, and I believe that the race is ready for all the truth, and that which is proper for the few is proper for the many. I believe that the greater the degree of knowledge, the greater the degree of power and advancement. I believe that ignorance is not happiness, and that to keep a man ignorant of a natural fact, in order that he may escape its effect, is like allowing him to smoke when seated on a keg of gunpowder, rather than to acquaint him with the knowledge of explosives, or, to use another figure, to advise him to bury his head in the sand like an ostrich, rather than to look upon the approach of a possible danger. I do not believe in such sophistry. I do not believe in ignorance. I do not believe in darkness. Therefore, I propose to turn on the light. Chapter 7. Mentative Poles. Whatever mind power may be, in its ultimate nature, it is true that in its working nature, or phase of operation, it seems to work along similar lines to those followed by electricity. Like electricity, mind power undoubtedly has two poles, or phases. Like electricity, it travels in currents. Like electricity, it operates by induction. Like electricity, it is vibratory in its manifestation. and like the higher forms of energy, super electrical in nature, it possesses radioactivity or radiant energy. That is, like many other forms of radiant energy, it is constantly throwing off streams of active energy in the shape of rays, vibrations, or waves. Recent scientific discoveries have proven this, and in the next few years, the world will be startled by additional discoveries along these lines. Already we are receiving hints of mental photographs or radiographs, and before long we shall have telementometers that will register the telemental waves. The brain I regard as in the nature of transformer, the universal mind power, or possibly as a converter of the force into mentation. The brain cannot create mind power. Its office is merely to transform or convert the existing energy into usable forms and phases. Science agrees in the belief that in all brain processes there is an employment of some kind of energy and a burning up of brain substance. Just as there is a constant burning up of the elements of an electrical battery in the production of electricity, so is there a burning up of brain matter in the production of mentation. And yet science teaches us that no electricity is ever created. Simply a portion of the universal electricity is converted or transformed, and I believe that the same holds good in mental action in the brain. And now it is time for us to begin our consideration of the two mentative poles. In this book, I shall hold to the fact that there is evident in the manifestation of mind power in any and all forms two distinct poles or phases. I find myself compelled to coin two more terms for these poles or phases, for there are none now in common use. I shall call these two mentative poles respectively the emotive pole and the motive pole. The word motive means that which acts, wills, moves, chooses, controls. The word emotive means that which manifests feelings, emotions, agitation, passion, sensation, etc. These definitions apply to my use of the term in these lessons. You will be able to fix these two ideas connected with the mentative poles by thinking of the motive pole as will and the emotive pole as feeling. The emotive pole manifests actively as desire force. The motive pole manifests actively as willpower. These two poles play a most important part along the lines of telementation. Not only does desire cause the response of one's own will, but both desire and will are active forces in themselves and act and react upon the desire and will poles of mentality of others. We shall see many evidences of this as these lessons progress. In fact, the entire theory and practice of mind power depends upon this underlying principle. Your strong desire force is able to rouse the will of another mind in response thereto. It may likewise set up vibrations in the other mind, awakening their similar desires. Your will power may arouse desire in the mind of another and cause action in accordance therewith. It may also overpower the will of another and lead it captive. Your combined will and desire pouring out in the mentative current may produce a combined effect upon the minds of others by telemental induction. These two poles of the mind are both active and powerful in their effect. Both may be roused into intense activity according to well-known laws, as we shall see. Let us take a few moments' time and consider the subject of desire force and willpower before we proceed further. Those who have studied the phenomena of mind power have generally accepted the theory that effect upon other people was produced by the thought of the sender, and all the teachings upon the subject have been along these lines. I too fell into this error and for many years taught of the power of thought, etc. But I have come to modify my views on the subject. Of course, everyone who has paid any attention to this subject knows that thought transference is a fact, telementation being an established reality. But there is a very great difference between the fact that thoughts may be sent and received like telegraphic messages on the one hand, and that persons may be influenced and affected and bent to the desire or will of another on the other hand. It is like the difference between thinking and doing in ordinary life. One may send his thoughts so that another may receive them, but what of this? What has this to do with the doing and compelling? It is evident that the real force must be looked for in some far more elementary and vital operation of the mind than logical and reasoning thought. What is thought? Webster Dictionary defines it as an exercise of the mind in any of its higher forms, reflection. What is thought? Webster Dictionary defines it as an exercise of the mind in any of its higher forms, reflection and cogitation. Nothing very dynamic about this, surely. We must look for something in the mind having more elementary force and power. Let us think for a moment. What part of the mind seems to produce the greater moving power and strength? Is it not chiefly that region of the mind that produces what we call emotions, feelings, desires, cravings, passions? Does not this part of the mind really cause the greatest incentive action on our part? Is not the whole moving force largely summed up in the two words desire and will? Think of this a moment. Why did you do this thing and that thing? Is it because you thought about it by cold, logical reasoning and acted upon the impulse given thereby? Or was it not because you wanted to do it, desired to do it, felt like doing it? Is it not always the feeling or desire precedent to and the other originator of the action? And as for thought, is it not used merely as an instrument to think up the best ways of manifesting the feeling or desire? Think of this. Is it not so? Did you ever do a thing except under compulsion that you did not desire to do? And was not the desire the preceding cause of your every action? Desire is the great inciting power of the mind. Desire is that which incites to action, and you always act upon the strongest desire, subject always to the restraining influence of the reason and the restricting or impelling influence of the will. I will tell you more about this wonderful thing, the will, in a moment or two. But let us now think of desire, for that is the real emotive power. Desire originates in the subconscious regions of the mind, and often we can feel her there before she emerges into consciousness, stirring us up in feelings of vague discontent and unrest. After a bit, gathering enough force, she emerges into the conscious field and then begins to demand expression. Now, remember that when I say desire, I mean all kinds of desire, high and low. Many people think of desire as only the craving of a low nature, but desire really means a feeling that wants something, and that something may be the very highest aspiration of the human mind. Now, this desire in all of its manifestations has a mighty power of attraction and influence. It manifests as the law of mentative action, which is constantly drawing towards us the things we desire and also drawing us towards them. Not only is this true on the conscious plane, but even on the subconscious. Our desires constitute our nature, and our nature is always operating the mighty power of mentative attraction. The trouble with most of us is that we allow our desire force to be scattered and diffused, thereby lessening its attractive power. It is only when we learn the secrets of concentration and focusing the desire force by the will that we are able to get results above the average. The will is the director and controller of the desire force, and upon its training and management depends the powerful use of the latter. Desire force not only has its effects upon the person and others near him, but it may be and often is sent for thousands of miles, where it affects and influences others in ways. Desire force is the mighty force which makes many of the phases of mind power possible. It spreads out from the mind of the person, affecting and influencing others even at other parts of the world. If concentrated and directed by the will, it is a force beside which the X-ray and electricity fade into insignificance. It moves not merely blind, lifeless things, but the living minds, thoughts and emotions, passions, actions of man. It is a force that rules the world and its destinies. Like any other great natural force, it is capable of being used for good or evil. It is neither good nor evil. It is either or both, according to the mind in which it originates. What phase of mental effort is more apt to be a motive force? The cold, lifeless thought without an abstract metaphysical proposition, or a mathematical problem on the one hand, and a warm, vital wave of feeling, emotion or passion, such as love, hate, ambition, aspiration, courage and desire on the other. And remember that these last mentioned all belong to the feeling side of the mind, and all are a manifestation of elementary desire. Desire is at the bottom of all feeling. Before we can love or hate, there must be desire. Before we can have ambition or aspirations, there must be desire. Before we can manifest courage and energy, there must be desire. Desire for something must underlie all life action. Desire, conscious or subconscious. Abstract thought is cold, bare thing, lacking vitality and warmth. Desire is filled with life, throbbing, longing, wanting, craving, insisting, and ever pressing outwards towards action. Desire indeed is the phase of our mental action that is a motive force. And not only does desire incite us to action, move us to accomplish its ends, but it also, when sufficiently strong, surges out from our minds in great waves and clouds of invisible and subtle energy or force, and travels here and there toward the object of its inner urge, affecting, attracting, drawing, forcing the desired thing into submission to its cravings and demands. In the presence of some strong man or woman, that is, in the presence of one whose desire burns fiercely and strongly, and whose will has learned to concentrate the desire force, one may actually feel the impact of the elementary principle of mind as it vibrates in great waves from the brain and nervous systems of such a one. Who has not met people who actually seemed to be living desire and will? The source of desire force exists in everyone, and it may be developed to a wonderful degree. The desire of many of you, of the majority of the race, in fact, never get further than the faint 1-2 stage. These people wish for things in a faint pink tea sort of way. They never want a thing hard enough to stir the desire force into action and make the thing come to them, or else make it take them to the thing. The majority of people do not know how to desire. They do not know what it is to be filled with that intense, eager, longing, craving, ravenous desire that fills them with a new and mighty force and makes them demand things instead of merely asking for them. They are like sheep, pigeons, or rabbits and sit meekly around while the strong ones of the race, the ones filled with masterful desire, walk around and pick up every good thing in sight. And it serves them right, for they are not exercising the force which nature has given them for the purpose of self-protection and use. They have had the elementary vigor and virality bleached out of them by the refinements of one phase of civilization, and have nearly lost all that goes to make up manly men and natural women. They have become beggars, mendicants of nature, instead of masters of her. The forces of nature are at the disposal of the man of vigor and determination and desire. Such a one has but to knock at the door of attainment and have it opened to him. Instead of doing this, the majority of us sit around the doorsteps whining that the door shall be opened to us. In the name of human power, friends, get up, fill yourself with powerful desire, then march up to the door and smite it fiercely with your clenched fist, demanding masterfully, "Open for me, the master," and know it will fly open at your call. I have shown you the desire force is the great force underlying the phenomena of mental magic. But desire force without the aid of the will is like steam unconfined and undirected, and gunpowder fired into the open air, both wasted energy. The will is the lever and director of the great power of desire, and without its aid the latter is almost inoperative and ineffectual. Let us examine into the operation of the will. The will has two offices in connection with desire. These two offices may be spoken of as 1. The directing office, and 2. The protecting office. The will acts as the arouser, director, restrainer, concentrator, and manager of the great occult forces of desire. What is generally known as willpower is often in reality merely desire force, strongly concentrated and directed to a focus by the power of the will. Remember this, please, for it will enable you to form a better idea of the subject of willpower. Often when you hear willpower spoken of, whatever is attributed to it is really said of and attributed to desire force, controlled, directed, and focused by the will. The effort of the will is operated in the direction of this directing, focusing, concentrating, etc., and in the degree that the will is trained to do this, so is the degree of willpower of the individual. Not only is the will able to do this, but it is able also to direct the desire force into the mind of other persons, awakening similar vibrations there, and then by its own power, the will is able to direct the desire force of other persons into action, taking away that office from the will of the other persons, if their will not be strong enough in its protective office to resist the attack. The idea of willpower is more familiar to the minds of people than is that of desire force. All recognize the wonderful power of the will and know of many instances of great accomplishment by reason of its power. And yet, how few have stopped to consider that unless there was a preceding desire, there could be no manifestation of will. Unless a person desires, that is, wants to do a thing, he will manifest no willpower. But on the other hand, one may desire to do a thing, and unless the will is aroused and applied, no action will occur. Desire arouses will, and will may stimulate desire. The two act and react upon each other. The two should work in unison, and the trained individual has both under his control and pulling well together like a well-trained team. Willpower is more than a mere determination to act. Although that mental attitude and action is manifested in willpower, it is a living force. Desire is the state, and will the brother twin, and both together manifest that which we know as dynamic mentation. Willpower is more than a mere mental faculty. It is a mighty attribute, the influence of which may extend far beyond the mind of the person manifesting it. The greatest feats of the occult magicians depended upon telementation, operated by trained willpower, and the so-called great men of history, ancient and modern, had their source of strength in this willpower, which they trained and developed to an extraordinary degree. The exercise of will shows itself in two ways. One, the mastery of one's own mind, and two, the mastery of the minds of others. The second is well nigh impossible unless the first be accomplished. One must first train his mind so that he will hold it firmly in the grasp of the will, and prevent it from jumping this way and that way, instead of moving ahead to its purpose. When one has so trained his mind to be obedient to his will, that it can be held steady and one-pointed, as the Hindus say, then is he in a position to direct his mentative currents upon others to the best advantage. But so long as his mind is in a stage of disorganization, one faculty pulling this way and the other way, and so on, he cannot hope to concentrate upon others the force that is being wasted in keeping order at home. When the mind is mastered by the will, then may new territory be conquered. The term willpower is commonly used in connection with the manifestation of firmness and determination. The determined will is known as a mighty factor towards attainment and accomplishment. And I think it well to consider this fact at this point, for back of all outward manifestations of mentative influence along active lines lies this determined will of the individual. The more determined and firm the will of the individual, the stronger the mentative influence emitted and emanated by him. This statement should not require proof, for its truth is apparent to all who have made a study of man and his powers. It has been recognized by writers in all times. There are a few quotations that will tend to fix the matter firmly in your mind and create in you a desire to manifest the determined will, the lever that directs and concentrates mind power. Buxton said, "The longer I live, the more certain I am that the great difference between man, between the feeble and the powerful, the great and the insignificant, is energy, invincible determination of a purpose once fixed, and then victory or death. That quality will do anything that can be done in this world, and no talents, no circumstances, no opportunities will make a two-legged creature a man without it." Donald G. Mitchell said, "Resolve is what makes a man manifest, not puny resolve, not crude determination, not errant purposes, but that strong will which treads down difficulties and danger, as a boy treads down the heaving frost lands of winter, which kindles his eyes and brain with a proud pulse beat towards the unattainable. Will makes men giants." Disraeli said, "I have brought myself by long meditation to the conviction that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it, and nothing can resist the will which will stake even existence upon its fulfillment." Sir John Simpson said, "A passionate desire and unwearied will can perform impossibilities, or what may seem to be such to the cold and feeble." John Foster said, "It is wonderful how even the casualties of life seem to bow to a spirit that will not bow to them, and yield to subserve a design which they may in their first apparent tendency threaten to frustrate, when a firm decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom. As we have seen, the use of the will as the projector of mentative currents is the real base of all mentative induction, under whatever name it may be manifested, and the phase of will known as telementation is the form, the result of which strikes the observer with the greatest force. The will currents of a strong man reaches out far beyond the limits of his brain and influences peoples and things, causing them to be inclined towards his wishes. Many men have worked their will upon others far removed, and much that is known as thought transference, telepathy, mental influence, etc., is really this working of the will currents over space. Will is a living force that can be projected and operated at a distance. It has a property of reacting upon others and permeating them with a mental essence not their own, unless they repel their invasion or fortify themselves against the aggression. Desire and will are more elementary forms of mentation than thought. They underlie thought. Without desire and will, there can be no thought. They precede thought and are closely allied to the essence of what we call feeling. Many people live almost together on the feeling plane and exercise but little thought. The infant feels, desires and wills before it can think. Desire and will are really the medium form which thought is evolved. A modern writer on mysticism has said, "There is no force in the universe except will force," meaning, of course, the great natural force of energy called will, of which desire and will in man are expressions. Desire is a natural force and can be used, managed, controlled and directed just as can be any other natural force. And what we know as willpower is the positive phase of directed desire. The Orientals have trained and cultivated this willpower to a degree that seemed miraculous to the Western mind, and by this trained willpower they perform the so-called miracles that confound the Western scientists. But even the West has its men of iron will, whose influence is felt on all sides and whose power is openly acknowledged by the public. In the East, these men are generally hermits and sages, while in the West they are generally men of actions, leaders, captains of industry, etc. Mind power is the essence of all mentative induction. It includes the positive, forcing, impelling, compelling, driving phase called will as its motive pole, and as its emotive pole, it has that attracting, drawing, pulling, luring, charming, fascinating something that we call desire. Mind power manifests in the phases of both desire and will, as we generally use these terms, for it is composed of the elements of both. Will may be said to represent the masculine side of mind power and desire the feminine side. It may help you to fix in your mind the attributes, characteristics and nature of these two phases of mentative energy by associating them with the idea of masculine and feminine. I wish that you would learn to think of the desire force as the warm, ardent, fiery, forceful energy underlying the manifestations of mind power, and of the willpower as a cold, keen, strong, directing, controlling projector of the energy. By fixing these mental images in your mind, you will be better able to manifest the two phases as occasion arises. Besides its office as the director of the energy, the will serves a very important office as the restrainer of desire force. When under the control of the I of the person and taking the suggestion of reason and judgment, it is able to prevent one from expressing undesirable or hurtful desires. It refuses to project the desire force or to allow the desire to take effect in action. It also turns back the desire upon itself and refuses to allow it to manifest. It is the utmost important that the individual acquire a mastery of his will, for by doing so he will be able to not only to express his desires with the greatest force and effect, but will also be enabled to restrain hurtful desires and to prevent their manifestation upon the plane of action. And the will has still another important office. It acts as a protector. The will repels the influence of vibrations of another mind and renders its possessor immune to undesirable thought waves. It creates a protective aura around the individual which will turn aside the thought waves or vibrations which may reach him, whether such be sent directly to him or whether they are the vibrations emanating from minds of others and unconsciously sent forth. The will, when properly used, acts as an insulator for attacks upon the desire pole of one's mind and prevents the vibrations from reaching their mark. And if it be well trained and strengthened, it will be able also to resist the most powerful attacks upon it by the wills of others, and will beat back the vibrations which would force their way into its stronghold to take it captive. That is the end of chapter 6 and chapter 7. If you haven't already, please subscribe below to be notified when we post the next video. Thank you for your time.